It's the news that no Californian wants to hear. Scientists have just announced that the San Andreas Fault is about to do something massive. For years, experts have been warning that the big one is coming, but now they believe it's closer than ever before. As tension builds along the massive fault line, the entire region is on edge. Will this be the catastrophic earthquake that has been predicted for decades? And if so, how will California cope with the aftermath? The San Andreas Fault is a significant crack in the crust of the Earth that runs through the far western part of North America. After following a path that is more than 800 miles long in a northwesterly direction from the northernmost point of the Gulf of California through western California in the United States, the fault eventually emerges into the Pacific Ocean in the general vicinity of the San Francisco. Tectonic movement along the fault has been associated with occasional large earthquakes that originated near the surface along its path. These earthquakes include a devastating quake in San Francisco in 1906, a less serious event there in 1989, and a powerful and destructive quake that occurred in the Los Angeles suburb of Northridge in 1994 that occurred along one of the San Andreas's larger secondary faults. All of these earthquakes occurred along the San Andreas Fault. The San Andreas Fault is considered to be the transform boundary between two major plates of the Earth's crust, namely the North American plate to the north and east and the Northern Pacific plate to the south and west. This is to the theory of plate tectonics. The San Andreas Fault is a strike-slip fault because the Northern Pacific plate is sliding laterally across the North American plate while moving in a northerly direction. Throughout geologic time, the movement of the plates relative to each other has averaged approximately 1 centimeter every year. However, the yearly rate of movement has increased to between 4 and 6 centimeters per year since the early 20th century. During the earthquake that occurred in 1906, certain sections of the fault line moved as much as 6.4 meters. The San Andreas Fault is home to the vast bulk of California's population, which is concentrated in its immediate proximity. There are settlements, villages, housing projects, and roads that have been built directly on top of it, and a tunnel for the Bay Area Rapid Transit System has been bored straight through the fault zone. The construction of buildings that can absorb seismic shocks and the strengthening of roads and bridges to withstand the effects of earthquakes are examples of the preventative steps that have been taken. The San Andreas Fault is a massive crack in the Earth's crust, caused by the parallel movements of two tectonic plates. Large earthquakes, cracks, and landslides have all been linked to this fault, and another one may be on the horizon. A fault is a crack or series of cracks between two massive, relative moving rock pieces in geology. The San Andreas Fault, for example, is about 800 miles long and is perhaps the longest fault in the world. It is also usual for there to be a noticeable difference in position between the two sides of the fault. Plate tectonics is the cause of faults. The crust of Earth is solid, yet it rests on top of a fluid mantle. This process results in the crust breaking apart into separate stiff chunks known as tectonic plates. These plates slide under and along one another, shifting their positions relative to one another. However, the plates don't always perfectly glide or flow past each other due to the high levels of friction involved, which causes a great deal of stress. This can cause internal cracks and fissures to manifest in the plate. Earthquakes are another byproduct of these processes. Most tremors occur where tectonic plates meet. The San Andreas Fault is the boundary between the Northern Pacific Plate and the North American Plate. Therefore, the same thing applies there. In the case of the San Andreas Fault, the relative movement between the plates is mostly horizontal, making it a transform fault rather than a subduction fault, like those found in subduction zones. Many more big transform faults also exist, and they are also commonly associated with seismic activity. Because of the friction between the tectonic plates, earthquakes commonly occur at faults and the plate's edges. Since the plate's edges aren't perfectly smooth, friction works against the plate's attempts to slide past one another. More energy is accumulated and stress increases at specific spots, often along the fault line, where the plates grind against one another. An earthquake occurs when tension increases over a certain point, causing a fault to rupture and release the stored strain energy in the form of seismic waves. Earthquakes in California. Although the southern portion of the San Andreas Fault has only existed for about 5 million years, the fault's formation began roughly 30 million years ago. The fault's slip rate is quite slow, between 20 and 35 millimeters each year, or around the rate at which your fingernails grow. This rate may not seem like much, and over a time frame of a few years it won't accomplish anything. However, over longer timescales, the constant motion of the plates will generate the aforementioned stress, which will then be released as earthquakes. The fault was first noted more than a century ago. Andrew Lawson, a geology professor at UC Berkeley, discovered the fault in 1895 and gave it the name Laguna de San Andreas, after a lake in the area. Unbeknownst to Lawson, he had also uncovered a previously unknown category of earthquakes called intermediate depth earthquakes. However, let's not jump the gun. The frequency of California's earthquakes was common knowledge. It wasn't known how closely the San Andreas Fault was associated with the tremors before plate tectonics became a widely accepted hypothesis in the 1970s. The Hayward earthquake of 1868 had not long since occurred, and it had wreaked havoc on both sides of the bay, claiming many lives. However, not even Lawson had a firm grasp on the situation. When a devastating earthquake hit San Francisco in 1906, everything changed. Over 3,000 people perished, and 80% of the city was devastated when an earthquake hit. After the fires were put out, Lawson formed a team of top geologists from throughout the U.S. to investigate the tremor's possible link to the San Andreas Fault. The group compiled a detailed analysis, now commonly known as the Lawson Report, in which they detailed seismograph records from throughout the world, documented the damage to San Francisco buildings, evaluated the geology around San Francisco, and plotted their results. The report was so thorough and important that it set a standard for how earthquakes in the U.S. should be studied. In addition, the analysis provided conclusive evidence that the San Andreas Fault is the mother of all earthquake faults. However, the concept of movement occurring laterally along the plate was still very contentious. For instance, studies have shown that every 22 years or so, the fault causes an earthquake of magnitude 6. These occurrences occurred with surprising regularity in 1857, 1881, 1901, 1922, 1934, and 1966. The following earthquake from 1966 occurred in 2004. This shows that it is difficult to forecast when earthquakes will occur. An earthquake occurs when a buildup of pressure is suddenly released. However, while the system's overall behavior can be estimated, pinpointing an earthquake's particular occurrence is impossible. Even so, scientists have uncovered some hints. The upcoming earthquake. Most Californians reside in areas close to or even on the San Andreas Fault, and several cities and developments have been constructed directly on the fault itself. Despite precautions, millions upon millions of people remain vulnerable to an earthquake, and fear has understandably spread. Unless they strike a heavily populated area, earthquakes of magnitude 6 rarely cause widespread destruction. However, a magnitude 7 or 8, or even greater, earthquake might cause widespread destruction. When measuring the intensity of an earthquake, scientists use a logarithmic scale with a base of 10, which indicates that for every magnitude increase, the earthquake is 10 times more powerful. An earthquake with a magnitude of 8 is 10 times more powerful than one of magnitude 7, and 100 times more powerful than one of magnitude 6. The next significant earthquake to hit. The San Andreas Fault is the location of the majority of people's homes in the state of California. In fact, certain cities and other development projects are built directly on top of it. Even if there have been some precautions taken, millions upon millions of people are still at risk of being affected by an earthquake, and it is easy to see why so many people are anxious about the situation. Even though earthquakes of a magnitude of 6 have the potential to cause significant damage in highly populated areas, on the whole they are not catastrophic. However, a magnitude 7 earthquake, or perhaps an even more catastrophic magnitude 8 earthquake, might cause absolute devastation. It is difficult to accurately anticipate when an earthquake will occur. All we can do is acquire a basic idea of when one might occur. Let us stress this point once more. Having said all of this, a study that was conducted in 2006 and published in Nature concluded that the San Andreas Fault has achieved a suitable stress level for an earthquake of magnitude 7 or higher. According to the findings of the study, the risk is greatest in the southern portion of the fault, which corresponds to the region in and around Los Angeles. The results of several studies indicate that Los Angeles may be long overdue for an earthquake. There hasn't been a significant earthquake in the Los Angeles region in over 300 years. Strong earthquakes have occurred relatively recently on the central 1857 and northern 1906 segments of the fault, which has relieved some of the stress in those places, but there hasn't been a large earthquake in the Los Angeles region in over 300 years. The metropolitan area of Palm Springs and Indio would sustain significant damage in the event of an earthquake in this region. It is difficult to even put into words how devastating an earthquake of this magnitude would be, particularly for older buildings and those constructed in coastal regions, on unconsolidated gravel, or in locations with high water tables. The fact that there has been no significant earthquake in the Los Angeles area in the 16 years since the study was released demonstrates how difficult it is to make accurate predictions regarding the occurrence of earthquakes of this magnitude. The subsequent USGS reports have also made varied projections regarding the probability of future catastrophes, and while the risk does indeed seem to be high, it is difficult to put a timetable on the problem because there is so much uncertainty around it. To make matters even more complicated, the San Andreas Fault produces earthquakes of an intermediate depth. This indicates that the hypocenter of an earthquake, the place within the Earth where a rupture begins, lies between 70 and 300 kilometers deep, although the majority of strong earthquakes across the world tend to be located at a shallower depth. These earthquakes of an intermediate depth are more difficult to examine and have a deeper mystery around them than their shallow cousins. Although our knowledge of the San Andreas Fault and the seismogenic mechanisms associated with other faults is far from complete, it has significantly advanced over the past several decades. When the inevitable earthquake does strike, we can only hope that this information will be used to formulate sensible regulations that will prevent loss of life and property damage. That's all for the video today. We will be right back with more. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.